Was everyone who needed to access the video of last week able to find it on Google Classroom? Can you hear me?
Yeah. I'm finishing up my dinner as well, so I'll be a
Oh,
bit
okay.
quiet.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah, I love it when YouTube blocks things that are on YouTube. The videos it didn't like us using were like Billie Jean, and that was on YouTube. So I don't pretend to understand what YouTube does and does not do, but that's always kind of dumb to me. So I put it on Google Classroom, and I hope everybody was able to access that. If you needed help with that, please let me know. Because I have extended the deadline for those quizzes until like this weekend to give you a little more time. Because of that being blocked, I didn't realize it until a couple days later that it had blocked it, which I think is dumb. But YouTube didn't ask me. So. And we'll see. We may get blocked again tonight. Who knows? If we do, I'll put it on Google Classroom again. If you're not familiar with Google Classroom or how to manipulate that, how to work that, let me know, and I'll walk you through it. But it's pretty easy. But if you didn't use it at school previously, you might not be familiar with how to get yourself into the class and that kind of stuff. So let me know if I need to help with that. Okay. The goal tonight is to get through chapters 36, and 37, and then have you do 38 and 39 on your own. That's going to set us up to do 3 next time and 3 the next time. And then that's it. We only have 2 more classes before finals. It's hard to believe that we're that close, but we're that close. The online final has a definite set time because this class is set to end on December 15th, according to our licensing through the entity that licenses this, Connect for Education. So everything has to be done and wrapped up by the 15th of December, which I know sounds like a long time from now, but it's really not that far away. So you need to kind of keep that in mind and plan accordingly so you're sure you can get that final finished in time. Because once it's done this time. I'm not sure there's much I can do about it. So just keep that in mind. And I'll remind you again. I'm hoping that if everything goes according to plan, then the very last class that we're scheduled to have is the 12th, and maybe we can do a little review with maybe kind of a study guide to help with the final. That's the plan, at least. So hopefully we can stick to the schedule that I've got with having you all do a couple on your own. That frees us up and lets us go a little faster, so that maybe when we get down to the end, we can take a minute and just kind of step back and be sure that everybody knows what's going on, and we can do a little review. So, all right. So let's get rolling. Oh, I cannot minimize this. Okay. Once again, I'm only using one screen tonight. So I'll have to hop back and forth some. Let's share a screen. All right, you guys are over on the side. So we're going to start tonight with Keepers of Tradition. Always finding a place to put you. That's the tricky part. Let's try over here. Okay. Dear Santa, for Christmas, I want a bigger screen.
The musicians discussed in this chapter.
You could really start from there and teach an entire class on music from the 80s to the present day. It's hard for me to think that that was 40 years ago because this is my generation, but it's true. Um, they mentioned just a few names here: hardcore punk of the Replacements, Blue Eyed Soul of George Michael, traditional rock of Bruce Springsteen, and the re-envisioned rock of Peter Gabriel, who we have met before. Bruce Springsteen, also known as the Boss, drew heavily upon a number of older rock traditions, including 1950s rock and roll, Phil Spector's Wall of Sound, the blues, and Bob Dylan's folk music. Springsteen is from New Jersey, proudly from New Jersey, and he often sang with pride about his experiences and perspectives. Springsteen was backed by the E Street Band, and this group included instruments that were unusual, if not anachronistic, in rock music of the period, including violin, trombones, saxophones, and trumpets. In his music, Springsteen saw himself as the voice of the average American, person who tries to live out the American dream in the face of heartbreak, joblessness, aging, and disappointment. Springsteen's third album, Born to Run, in 1975, had a thick, symphonic sound strongly reminiscent of Spector's Wall of Sound from the 1960s. Springsteen wrote the songs on the piano, and then he described to the members of the band or the producers how he wanted the remaining instruments to sound. The album's title single, Born to Run, involved dozens of musicians recording in a style and technique very similar to that of Spector. According to Springsteen, he wanted the song to sound like Roy Orbison singing Bob Dylan, produced by Phil Spector. By this time, you should be familiar with those names. Other songs on Born to Run evoke earlier musical styles. For example, Cover Me is based on the 12-bar blues, a form that rock musicians had largely been ignoring since the days of the British blues revival scene. Let's take a moment and hear a little Springsteen. Always a good way to start the night. I'm going to start with Born to Run because everybody should know Born to Run. The saxophone's being played by Clarence Clemens, also known as the Big Man. He was a E Street Band member from The Jump. Um, he passed away about 6 years ago, I think. Simon down. Yep. Yep. Some pretty good stuff right there. All right. I'm not going to play Cover Me. If you'd like to hear Cover Me, you have access to that. It's also a good tune. If you haven't heard it, you will enjoy it. Bruce Springsteen's best-selling album was 1984's Born in the USA, which features singles including Glory Days and Born in the USA. Many of Springsteen's songs indirectly criticize the government and other institutions that seem to be at odds with the goals of the average American person, and they often sang about difficulties faced by young people who are simply trying to do the right thing. In Born in the USA, Springsteen sings of an average American life that's negatively affected by forces outside the individual's control. The song was critical of the Vietnam War and perceived mistreatment of Vietnam veterans, a perspective that aligned Springsteen with folk musicians of the 1960s. Springsteen's music was not necessarily patriotic, yet his concerts were crowded with people waving American flags, mainly because they weren't really paying attention to what the song was saying. Born in the USA was even used by both the Democrat and Republican candidates during the 1984 presidential election, although Springsteen did not endorse either candidate and instead played benefit concerts to benefit striking miners and unemployed steelworkers. This is one of the most probably misinterpreted songs in the history of modern rock, because people didn't pay attention to what was really being said in this song. So let's listen to Born in the USA and really listen to it with an ear for what he's actually saying. He's saying he's born in the USA, and therefore all these negative things are a part of his experience. It's not a glorification of being born in the USA. It's a criticism. It's got that catchy hook. Keep coming back again and again. Okay, we're gonna stop right there. I think you've probably heard that before, even if you didn't completely get what was being sung about. So, and the other one that's there is Glory Days, which is also a tune. If you haven't heard before, you should probably take a listen. I'm not going to play it tonight, but it's also talks about how, um, people have their moment, and some people get stuck in that moment, that they peak in high school and they never really progress past that point. And that's their glory days. They're always looking backwards instead of looking forwards. So that again is kind of a criticism of life in the United States in the 80s. If you peaked in high school, you don't try to get past that point, you never really reach a higher goal. You never really reach um, a higher and better life. So that's what that song is about. Another singer who promoted the experiences and points of view of the working class American was Indiana-born John Mellencamp, John Cougar Mellencamp. Mellencamp eschewed elaborate production techniques and unusual instruments and focused instead on traditional rock instrumentation and straightforward forms and lyrics. Mellencamp, who recorded under the name John Cougar during the late 70s, then changed to Mellencamp in the early 1980s, had his first major success in 1982 with the album American Fool. American Fool featured singles such as Jack and Diane, which is a tale of two American kids growing up in the heartland. And another lyric from that is two American kids doing the best they can. Mellencamp's next album, Scarecrow, included the single Small Town, an ode to the values and experiences learned by growing up in a small Midwestern town. Let's hear a little bit of Small Town. Small town. Oops, sorry. That is not what I meant to do. Oh, gee, what did I do? Okay, hang on. Let's try that again. I don't know what I did. It's too small town. Opportunity. You're right. Yeah. Small town. Small town. Small town. They bring back that opening hook. Okay, we'll stop right there. Um, if you don't know Jack and Diane, that was mentioned previously, I would strongly recommend listening to Jack and Diane. I bet you've heard it before because it's probably his best known song. He's not as directly critical of life in America as Springsteen. He's this is Simon, by the way. um, has a little more optimism, but he was one of the founders of something called Farm Aid, which is still going on. It happened just a few weeks ago, I think toward the end of September or so. Um, Founded by Willie Nelson, and Springsteen was involved for a while, and Mellencamp is still involved, where they would raise money for family farmers who were losing their farms because that was a big problem in the 80s. Family farmers couldn't afford to continue to live on their own land and farm, and so it was being bought out by big corporations. And those guys started something called Farm Aid to help benefit those farmers and try to help them hang on to their land. Blue Eyed Soul. Blue Eyed Soul refers to white musicians whose music shows strong influences of the 1960s African American popular music, such as the music of Motown and Atlantic. Duo Daryl Hall and John Oates, here they are, Hall and Oates, right here, were closely connected to African American popular music because Hall had worked with Leon Huff and Kenneth Gamble, owners of Philadelphia International, who wrote and produced dozens of hit songs during the 1970s, including MFSB's disco classic Love is the Message. Early Hall & Oates singles such as Rich Girl are steeped in the sounds of the 1960s and 1970s Black popular music. During the 80s, the duo began writing and singing in an increasingly pop-oriented style, which can be heard in singles such as I Can't Go For That and Out of Touch. Let's hear I Can't Go For That. I don't know why I can't make this bigger all of a sudden. Pull it. There we go. I mean, dude, you're in the way. And they bring in the saxophone solo, which is also kind of a staple of soul and of R&B. I'm not going to play the rest of that. You've probably heard it before. I would hope you've heard that before. British musician George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley formed the duo Wham in the early 1980s. And boy, were they an MTV thing. They were humongous. Wake Me Up Before You Go Go was on heavy rotation on MTV. They were everywhere. And they were pretty to look at. They were really pretty boys. So they were very popular with girls too. They loved looking at them. Singles such as Wake Me Up Before You Go Go and Freedom were sung and written by Michael, and his vocal style is deeply indebted to the soulful singing of the 1960s artists such as Sam Cooke and Otis Redding. In the mid-80s, Michael left Wham and started a solo career. His first album, Faith, had crossover success on the pop and black charts. In 1982, Billboard had changed the designation soul to black for African American popular music. It would change to R&B in 1990s. In fact, Faith was the first album by a white artist to reach #1 on the Billboard Black album charts, and singles such as Faith and I Want Your Sex topped both the pop and black singles charts. In an interview with Rolling Stone magazine, Michael said, "I was much happier with Faith being the #1 black album than I was when it became #1 on the #1 pop album." So let's take a moment and let's hear Faith. Because I bet you've heard Wake Me Up Before You Go Go, and that is pure bubblegum pop. So it opens up with this church organ sound. Remember when we talked about Madonna and Like a Little Prayer? Yeah, same energy. Hear that heavy bass line? Got a backbeat on 2 and 4. Accentuated by the tambourine. It will stop right there. You can listen to the rest of that if you haven't heard it before. If you haven't heard Wake Me Up Before You Go Go, you should listen to it. I'm not going to play it because I'm pretty sure you've heard it. Following George Michael's example, American singer Michael Bolton, much loved and much reviled, depending on who you talk to, recorded a series of songs that were either soul-inspired or covers of soul music during the late 1980s and 1990s. Some of his covers include Otis Redding Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, and Percy Sledge's When a Man Loves a Woman. Bolton's impassioned singing style was reminiscent of 1960s soul singers. Although his albums and singles sold well, they did not have the crossover appeal or success with African American listeners that George Michael's music had. So let's see, which one should we do? Let's do When a Man Loves a Woman. I think the reason why he didn't have that kind of success was because he is a little over the top emotionally. You'll hear what I mean. And some people found that, I guess, to be inauthentic. I don't know that he meant to be inauthentic, but it was, well, you'll hear it. Simon, you don't want to hear Michael Bolton? No? Change. Yeah, I'm going to stop right there. You can hear that emotional, you know, there's a lot going on there. And I think that's why maybe he did not have that kind of crossover success, because some people felt that maybe he was going too far. Um, my dog is over in the chair giving me stink eye because he's not enjoying Michael Bolton. So I'm going to move on. New Wave. We talked about New Wave previously, and New Wave continued into the 1980s, formed in England in the 1970s. The Police included guitarist Andy Summers, bassist and singer Sting, and drummer Stuart Copeland. The music of the Police drew from eclectic influences, including reggae, punk, poetry, and the writings of psychologist Carl Jung. On the surface, the music of the Police is deceptively simple. Trio of instruments, verse chorus form. Yet many of the Police songs are complex. In Don't Stand So Close to Me, the instrumentation is both sparse and complex. Instead of playing solos, Summers focuses on creating swaths of sound. And Copeland's drumming is far more intricate than simply laying down straightforward beats. Each verse of the song adds an instrumental layer, such as guitar, additional vocals, or a synthesizer. The lyrics, written and performed by Sting, describe a teacher's attraction to a young student. The deceptive simplicity of the song helps reflect the teacher's anxiety and inner turmoil. This was a huge hit for the Police. I don't know if it gives us lyrics or not. Nope. Notice that album says Sting and the Police. I'm going to stop right there. One of the things I always liked about Sting and the Police was his literary reference. He referenced the author Nabokov right there. If you don't know what that is, you know that when you hear Sting sing it, you might be maybe I should go check that out and figure out what that is. In some of his solo work, he used things like Scylla and Charybdis, which were maelstroms that pulled sailors down to their deaths in mythology. He talked about setting battlements on fire in another one of his songs. That's one of the things I always really liked about Sting was the fact that he could write rock songs that had all these literary references. It was pretty cool. Being a word person myself. The Irish band U2 followed the Police's lead. Here's Sting, by the way. They don't have a picture of U2, but maybe they're on the next page. U2 wrote songs that initially seemed straightforward, but were richly complex. In fact, the members of U2 would often enter the recording studio, improvise extensively, and then leave the actual assembly of the individual songs to the producers. That's pretty, that shows a lot of faith in your producers that you're just like, okay, here's everything, you guys figure it out. Most artists are not like that. One of the most recognizable features of U2's music is the style of guitar playing performed by The Edge, who often performs a series of repeated notes that are then surrounded with echo. Lead singer Bono wrote lyrics that were both poetic and politically conscious, such as Cried in the Name of Love, which was released in 1984, which is about Martin Luther King Jr. Just a little side note, my husband saw U2 when they were just getting their start. They came to, of all places, St. Louis, and they played on the campus of WashU. and they only had enough material for really one set of music at that time, which is about 45 minutes, but people liked it so much that they played it twice. So that's kind of cool. Let's hear Pride in the Name of Love, which is one of my favorite of their early work. Hear that echo? That's what they're talking about. In the name of love, men come and go. A man just found a man to overthrow. On one resist. One man washed on an empty beach. One man betrothed his. The sky and U2 is an Irish band. So a lot of their early work focused on what they called the Troubles in Ireland between the North and the South of Ireland. And in the 70s and 80s, there were a lot of bombings. There were a lot of basically mob hits between the IRA and the people who didn't agree with what they had to say. So a lot of U2's early work focused on that and how they thought that that should not be a thing that was happening. Sunday Bloody Sunday is a particular song that comes to mind. And oh gosh, it's right on the tip of my tongue. I'll think of it when I'm not trying to think of it. But their first album really dealt a lot with the troubles in Ireland. After leaving Genesis in 1976, Peter Gabriel released several solo albums, all of which were named Peter Gabriel. Gabriel's fifth solo album, So, in 1986, was far more pop oriented than his work with Genesis or his earlier solo albums. If you remember, Gabriel was the frontman for Genesis at the beginning, and he was really flamboyant. He liked elaborate costuming. He liked telling these kind of macabre, bizarre stories with his music and with props on stage. He's figuring out now that you don't really need all of that to make music that's interesting that people will like. Gabriel was interested in and influenced by African American popular music, particularly the soul music of Motown and Atlantic. He also included many influences from world music in the production of such as the Japanese flute called a shakuchi, and Brazilian percussion instruments and rhythmic patterns. Gabriel retained his poetic and theatrical sensibilities from his prog rock days with Genesis during his solo career. For example, the single Mercy Street is dedicated to and inspired by the American poet Anne Sexton, and the single Red Rain tells the story of Mozo, a recurring character in many of Gabriel's songs. Gabriel's most popular single released during his solo career was Sledgehammer. I agree. I think it's one of his best. Sledgehammer combines soulful Otis Redding style singing, a funk inspired groove with plenty of horns, lyric double entendres reminiscent of the rural and urban blues traditions, and the world music sounds of a synthesized shakuchi flute. According to Gabriel, Sledgehammer was an attempt to recreate some of the spirit and style of the music that most excited me as a teenager, 1960s soul. The lyrics of many of those songs were full of playful sexual innuendo, and this is my contribution to that songwriting tradition. Instead of covering a song from the 60s or replicating the performance style, Gabriel attempted to capture the sensibilities of 60s soul and update it into a new context. The music video for Sledgehammer also contributed to the single's popularity and sales. Directed by Stephen R. Johnson, the video included claymation. Claymation is the animation style of, say, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer at Christmas time, and many of those little Christmas specials that. But I know I grew up watching. Maybe you are too young to remember those being played every Christmas season. You can find them now streaming, but claymation, you have to take the clay form and you have to move it just slightly, and it's very meticulous. And stop motion animation provided by Aardman Animations and the Brothers Quay. In the first part of the video, Gabriel's face is manipulated and placed in a variety of contexts using stop motion animation techniques. Gabriel is then surrounded by dancers, crowds of people, and spinning piles of furniture, all of which were created by stop motion animation. During the synthesized shakuchi flute solo in the middle of the song, raw chickens dance on a stage. And a claymation interlude includes a clay version of Gabriel's face that is struck and then transformed by a sledgehammer. The unusual and fascinating music video for Sledgehammer is, to this date, the most played video in the history of MTV. That's saying something, because remember, Thriller was huge, humongous. To have outpaced Thriller and Billie Jean, that's a big deal. The appeal of the video undoubtedly helped increase the sales of the single and the album to people who might have otherwise never heard of Peter Gabriel. So let's see, that video should be in here, I hope. Wait, before you go. Here's Sledgehammer. Okay. That's the Shikachi flute. That'd be Peter Gabriel's face. Bring on the dancing chickens. Rabbit, yellow skin. This is the new stuff. Joe, won't you shine? I will shine for you. Shine for you. I will shine for you. Come on, come on. I mean, good stuff right there. Yeah. Another Peter Gabriel song that I highly recommend, which I think is on the So album as well, is In Your Eyes, which we don't have, but you might go and seek it out. That's a good song too. Throughout the 1980s, the number of punk musicians in the underground continued writing and recording music in an aesthetic that was heavily indebted to the sound of the Ramones and the Sex Pistols. This incarnation of punk became known as hardcore punk because it embraced the hard, aggressive sounds, fast speeds, and do-it-yourself attitude of early punk music. By the 1980s, the epicenter of American punk music had moved from New York to LA. in part because the New York scene had produced too many commercially successful acts, such as Blondie and the Talking Heads. The music of hardcore punk never appeared on charts or received play on MTV or radio stations, but it was a crucial underground movement that would inspire a generation of neopunk and alternative musicians during the 1990s. One of the first important hardcore punk bands in the LA scene was Fear, which was formed in 1977. There was their picture up here. Just a second. Hey, stop. There they are. Fear. Fear's music was loud, fast, and distorted, and guitarist and lead singer Lee Ving screamed most of his lyrics. The group brought some notoriety to the hardcore punk scene when they performed on the television show Saturday Night Live in 1981. They disparaged their host city by screaming, "New York sucks," and performing a song called "New York's All Right If You Like Saxophones," which openly mocked the city. During Fear's performance, the listeners were moshing, which is a form of dancing that involves physical contact, frequently colliding with other dancers and diving out and into and out of crowds. Mosh pits, which you've probably heard of, that's what moshing is. Although the people were consensually participating in the moshing, the dancing looked violent and dangerous to viewers at home. Saturday Night Live cut Fear's performance short, going to a commercial break in the middle of the band's performance. This type of reaction was welcomed by the hardcore punk community, who were largely uninterested in support from mainstream listeners or record labels. Remember, they didn't care about that kind of thing. They just wanted to play their music and do the thing. Black Flag was another band that played a significant role in the burgeoning Los Angeles hardcore punk scene. The group's personnel changed frequently during the 1970s, but their music always featured screamed lyrics, heavy distortion, lyrics with plenty of profanity, and songs that were short and concise. Henry Rollins became the group's lead singer in 1981, and the first album recorded with him was 1981's Damaged. To the followers of the Los Angeles hardcore punk scene, Damaged was one of the most important recordings made, and one that represented the music of that era. In Washington, D.C., a hardcore punk scene was developing that sounded very similar to that of Los Angeles hardcore. In contrast, though, musicians in the D.C. hardcore scene spoke out against drugs, promoted racial tolerance, and advocated intellectual government rather than anarchy. Ian MacKaye, a singer-songwriter and guitarist, founded Minor Threat in 1980 with drummer Jeff Nelson. Releasing music on their own label called Discord, Minor Threat's music had the distortion, screaming, and rough edges of British punk and the Los Angeles hardcore punk, but their messages advocated a drug and alcohol-free lifestyle. Their single Straight Edge, released in 1981, inspired the name for a movement of musicians and fans who avoided drugs and alcohol. The hardcore punk scene of Minneapolis's Twin Cities was a contrast to the sounds and styles of Los Angeles and DC. Bands such as The Replacement and Husker Du had a more melodic style than other hardcore punk bands of the period, which often made their music far more accessible to listeners. The Replacements were led by singer, guitarist, and songwriter Paul Westerberg, who retained the speed, distortion, and compactness of punk rock while adding catchy melodic hooks and more harmonic complexity. The single Color Me Impressed, released in 1983, represents the Replacements' musical style from this period, with its brief length, catchy melody, fast tempo, unpolished performing style, and instrumental hooks. Let's take a moment and hear some Color Me Impressed. Well, we hit the right button. Okay, a little distortion there at the end. So these bands were not drug and alcohol free. There's a reference right here. Put the party on the mirror. Pass the bill to Chris. That is a direct reference to cocaine usage because you chop it up on a mirror and you use a bill wrapped dollar bill, for instance, wrapped very tightly to snort it. So that's a direct drug reference, definitely not drug free and alcohol free like the DC bands. The Replacements recorded and released their early albums on the local independent label Twin Tone, but because Minneapolis is part of the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. But by the mid 80s, they had signed with the major label Sire Records and even had music videos on MTV. True to the punk rock do-it-yourself aesthetic, the Replacements video for Bastards of Young was 3.5 minutes of a stereo system playing. Like the Replacements, Husker Du was from Minnesota and recorded a melodic style of hardcore punk. They also became popular with the growing college rock market, and some of their videos aired on MTV. Songs such as their cover of the Byrds' 8 Miles High and their original song Makes No Sense at All combine catchy hooks with a punk sensibility. First signed to an independent label, Husker Du also joined a major label during the 1980s and recorded 2 albums for Warner Brothers before they disbanded in 1986. Both of these bands received relative exposure on the MTV program 120 Minutes, a weekly program devoted to independent and underground musicians whose videos were not played in MTV's regular video rotation. They mentioned the college rock market. A lot of colleges at this time had their own radio stations, and students would be the DJs and decide the playlists. And so if you were into a particular scene, if you had a show, you could play the music that you thought was cool, and people could tune in and listen to it or not. During the 70s and 80s, musicians drew from tradition in many different ways. Some groups were direct descendants of earlier genres, such as the hardcore punk musicians of LA, Washington, and Minnesota's Twin Cities. Others combined a number of earlier genres and styles, such as Bruce Springsteen's blend of a Bob Dylan-esque folk sensibility with traditional rock instrumentation and production values from Phil Spector and his Wall of Sound. Still others reinterpreted styles of the past, such as Peter Gabriel, whose version of 1960s soul mixed funk grooves and world music instruments with lyrical ideas of the blues and soul. Each artist in this lesson was deeply indebted to the music of the past, but each interpreted those influences in different ways. This quiz will be open after class tonight. I have not opened it yet, but I will. You probably recognize Nirvana hopping and bopping there. The music of alternative rock is bound not by a specific sound or musical style, but rather by a rejection of corporate or commercial values, although they did become pretty successful commercially and maybe not corporate, but definitely commercially. The conflicts between alternative rock aesthetics and mainstream success often prove troublesome and even detrimental to alternative rock groups of the 90s, in particular Pearl Jam and Kurt Cobain of Nirvana. During the 80s, the label alternative rock was applied to many different types of music recorded by a variety of groups and artists. In general, alternative rock ascribed an aesthetic or a point of view more than it referred to a specific sound or musical style. Many alternative rock groups were inspired directly or indirectly by punk's do-it-yourself attitude and disinterest in wide commercial appeal. Alternative rock artists were signed to independent labels, and they avoided the commercialism of pop. They typically kept the sounds, instrumentation, and production of their music simple and straightforward. Most alternative rock groups had strong regional followings, and over time, networks of local scenes connected and shared music via college radio stations, local performance venues, and independent record labels. By the early 1990s, alternative rock had emerged from the underground to become a major commercial and artistic competitor with superstar artists such as Michael Jackson, Bruce Springsteen, and Madonna. One of the most successful of these early alternative bands was REM, whose members included Michael Stipe, guitarist Peter Buck, bassist Mike Mills, and drummer Bill Berry. REM was from Athens, Georgia, and their music combined elements of Southern rock, folk, and punk. Early REM albums such as Murmur, released in 1983, treat all four members of the band equally in the sonic mix, and Stipe's voice and lyrics did not take precedent over the other parts. The single Radio Free Europe is typical of REM style from the early 1980s, with Stipe's cryptic, often indecipherable lyrics, Mills' fast, steady bass line that is reminiscent of punk rock, and Barry's driving backbeat on the drums. REM's follow-up album Document in 1987 sold over 1 million copies, and the single The One I Love charted in the top 20 in the United States and the UK. Let's take a moment and hear a bit of Radio Free Europe. almost like a stream of consciousness lyric. It's not connected to anything, but that's what they were going for. In the wake of the success of Document, REM signed with and released several albums on the major label Warner Brothers Records. Although other major labels had offered REM higher sums of money, they chose Warner Brothers because it was the only label that assured them total creative freedom in their recordings. Albums such as Green and Out of Time sold well and established a positive reputation for alternative rock, both with mainstream listeners and with major labels. Another influential alternative band from the 1980s was the so-called no-wave group Sonic Youth. Sonic Youth combined the intensity of punk rock with experimental techniques from classical music. We've heard that before. For example, they would place objects such as screwdrivers and drumsticks between the strings of the guitars to change the sound the instrument made, a technique first developed in the 1940s by the avant-garde classical composer John Cage. They also experimented with alternative tunings, inspired in part by Lou Reed of the Velvet Underground. Sonic Youth had two guitarists, Lee Ronaldo and Thurston Moore, as well as drummer Steve Shelley and bassist Kim Gordon. Ronaldo, Moore, and Gordon all provided vocals. Ronaldo and Moore created thick, dissonant textures with their guitars, and the group included generous amounts of feedback and distortion in their music. Why not? They're called Sonic Youth, after all. Silver Rocket, a single from Sonic Youth's 1988 album Daydream Nation, is typical of the group's style, featuring thick guitar textures, the fast tempos of punk rock, and screaming feedback. In 1990, Sonic Youth signed with the major label Geffen and released their sixth album, Goo. They continued to record albums into the 2000s. Sonic Youth, like REM, was one of the earliest alternative rock groups to sign with a major record label and have some mainstream success. Sonic Youth is also noteworthy because they promoted and supported a number of other musicians and artists. For example, Kim Gordon actively worked to support other female alternative rock musicians such as Hole and Breeders by mentioning them, producing albums, or directing or co-directing their music videos. Sonic Youth helped promote many bands from the emerging Seattle grunge rock scene, often inviting these bands to open for their concerts. I will let you listen to Silver Rocket on your own. Sonic Youth's heavy emphasis on guitars was a major influence on the music of the Seattle grunge rock scene. Grunge rockers were anti-establishment, anti-heavy metal, anti-hard rock, and anti-commercialism. Their lyrics were angry and filled with angst, and their sounds were guitar-driven. Seattle had been an epicenter of alternative rock since the early 1980s. At the center of Seattle's alternative music scene was the independent record label Sub Pop. Founded in 1987 by disc jockey and critic Bruce Pavitt and disc jockey Jonathan Poneman, Sub Pop began as a fanzine and quickly became a powerful presence for many emerging Seattle bands. One of the Pavitt and Poneman's first projects was a 3-record collection called Sub Pop 200, which featured music from 20 different Seattle bands, including Soundgarden, Catbutt, and Nirvana. Pavitt and Poneman promoted the music and Seattle itself as untouched by commercial influences, which only increased the allure of Seattle for musicians eager to join the alternative music scene. The most iconic band to emerge from Seattle's grunge rock scene was Nirvana. Singer and guitarist Kurt Cobain and bassist Chris Novoselic, well, I can't say that, met in a small, economically depressed Washington town about 100 miles from Seattle, and they were heavily influenced by the sounds of Seattle's growing alternative rock scene. After several unsuccessful attempts to find a drummer, they finally added Dave Grohl, who would remain with the group until its demise. Nirvana's music was driven by Cobain's guitar playing and lyrics. The guitar sounds of Nirvana have heavy influences of heavy metal's weight, punk rock distortion, and catchy melodic hooks. Cobain's lyrics were deeply serious, often critical of institutions and individuals, and he was strongly opposed to the idea of the commercial, quote, rock star, unquote. They signed with Sub Pop in 1988 and released their debut album Bleach the following year. Bleach sold 35,000 copies in and around Seattle, which is an impressive amount for a local band. Bleach had a raw, unpolished sound characterized by early singles such as Love Buzz. In 1991, Nirvana signed with the major label DGC, and they also opened for Sonic Youth during a European tour. Their album Nevermind was released in September of 1991, and the initial shipment of 50,000 copies sold out almost instantly. The album remained the intense, hook-oriented style of Bleach, but the production values were far higher, and Nevermind sounded more polished than Nirvana's early recordings. By 1992, Nevermind had displaced Michael Jackson's album Dangerous from the #1 spot on the album chart, and it stayed on the album charts for over 4 years. The most popular single from Nevermind was Smells Like Teen Spirit, and MTV's heavy play of the video helped promote the single, the album, and the band. The single features Cobain's angst-ridden lyrics delivered at various points in screams, growls, snarls, and even a near whisper. Sections of the song alternate between distortion, clarity, and straightforward melodies. The music video combined images of teenage cheerleaders with symbols of anarchy, and both the song and video spoke to millions of fans in their articulations of isolation, rage, and anxiety. Let's see if we have that video. I'm not sure if we do. We do. Oh no, so that's Love Buzz. Okay. Wow, I can't believe they didn't include that. If you have a chance, go and look up that video because it's worth seeing. We'll hear it, but it's better to see it, in my opinion. We'll do one more verse. It's about halfway through. I'm guessing you've heard that before. Maybe you've never seen the lyrics, but I'm betting you've heard it before. I also recommend Heart Shaped Box. If you haven't heard Heart Shaped Box, that's worth listening to. We will probably not listen to it in tonight in the interest of time, but I do recommend that you hear it. Cobain and the other members of Nirvana had a troubled relationship with success and fame. They viewed major labels and commercial success as forces of evil, yet they and their music were embraced by these forces and thrust into stardom nearly overnight. In a 1989 press release for Sub Pop Records, the group wrote, Nirvana sees the underground scene as becoming stagnant and more accessible to big league capitalist, big major record labels. But does Nirvana feel a moral duty to fight this cancerous evil? No way. We want to cash in and suck up to the bigwigs in hope that we can too get high and fuck. Soon we will need groupie repellent. My husband just gave me a withering look from the kitchen. That's what it says, dude. To Nirvana, mainstream success and major record labels conflicted with the values of artistry and independence that the group cherished. I'll tell you what, tonight's code word for those of you watching the recording is Nevermind, which was the album that the song we just heard came from. So Nevermind is your code word for tonight. In 1993, Nirvana released their third and final studio album, In Utero. This album returned to the abrasive, unpolished sounds of Bleach and the group's early days in Seattle. Further, Cobain's lyrics on the songs of In Utero directly addressed his troubled personal life and the band's battle with fame and celebrity. Songs such as Rape Me and Heart Shaped Box reflected Cobain's struggles, complete with heavily distorted guitars, strong drumming, and rich melodic hooks. All the while, Cobain was struggling with depression and drug addiction. He married Courtney Love, who was the lead singer of the grunge band Hole, which was mentioned previously, and the two reportedly used heroin together frequently. Early in 1994, Cobain attempted suicide with an overdose of drugs and alcohol. In April of 1994, he successfully took his own life. Cobain's death devastated a generation of listeners, some who saw him as a martyr for artistic vision in the face of capitalist music industry, and others who saw him as a victim of success and the inherent pressures success could bring to a musician. Cobain's suicide and the dissolution of Nirvana left a gaping hole in the world of grunge and alternative rock. Dave Grohl started the band Foo Fighters, and Novoselic has played with several different bands, including the Foo Fighters. Personal opinion, I think Dave Grohl is really a quality human being. During the lockdowns of COVID, he struck up a relationship online with this young female drummer named Nandy, and they would drum back and forth. And he brought her on stage to play after the lockdowns were over. She's like 14, and if you should go and look that up. It's really cool, because how cool was it to be 14 and play in front of an audience of like 60,000 people? And she was cool as a cucumber. She did not crack at all. It was amazing. In the wake of Nirvana's demise, another Seattle band, Pearl Jam, rose to prominence. Their complex textures and guitar riffs show the influence of 1960s musicians such as Jimi Hendrix and the Grateful Dead. Their lyrics addressed dark grunge rock topics such as depression and loneliness. Pearl Jam's first album, 10, released in 1991, was a tremendous commercial success and critical success, but it also drew sharp criticism. Kurt Cobain accused them of selling out, a sentiment that was echoed by a number of critics. In the face of this criticism, Pearl Jam continued to tour and promote their own particular brand of anti-commercial values. Pearl Jam was also vehemently opposed to commercialism, refusing to allow Ticketmaster to control the cost of tickets to live shows. In fact, they unsuccessfully sued Ticketmaster for unfair business practices. For years, they boycotted and refused to play in Ticketmaster venues. Starting with their second album, Versus, in 1993, Pearl Jam also refused to release music videos for their singles. They claimed that they wanted people to hear their music without having any specific visual images attached to sounds. By the release of 1994's Vitalogy, which is hard to say, most of Pearl Jam's songs were about the pressures of fame and commercialism. Another genre of music within the alternative scene was focused on the angry voices of women. The Riot Girl movement took the anger and intensity of punk rock and communicated issues specific to women, such as rape, domestic violence, and abuse. Riot Girls used their music to speak openly about issues that they felt earlier generations of women had ignored or downplayed. They also mocked messages that they had been given as little girls. Riot Girls also sang about women's rights and standing up for oneself in the face of oppression. According to a manifesto published in a Seattle area fanzine, the Riot Girl movement existed because a safe space needs to be created for girls where we can open our eyes and reach out to each other without being threatened by this sexist society and our day-to-day bullshit. By providing a musical forum for women to talk about abuses they had suffered, Riot Girls wanted to create a safe and protective environment for future generations of women. Bikini Kill was one of the prominent voices of the Riot Girl movement, fronted by singer and songwriter Kathleen Hanna, guitarist Billy Karen, bassist Kathy Wilcox, and drummer Toby Vale. Bikini Kill was active in Seattle at the same time as Nirvana. True to the alternative rock movement, Bikini Kill refused to sign with a major label, preferring instead to record on the independent label Kill Rock Stars. Charming. Their debut album, Pussy Whipped, was released in 1993, and it featured the single Rebel Girl. Rebel Girl, I can't say it. Rebel Girl is representative of Bikini Kill's style, with its heavy guitar, semi-shouted lyrics, punk-inspired lack of polish, and steady drumming in the verses that are reminiscent of a military lockstep. In the song, lead singer Hannah praises and admires the rebel girl of the title, noting, "In her kiss, I taste the revolution." In Rebel Girl and other songs, Bikini Kill promotes both platonic and romantic love between women, encouraging women to be empowered and free from male-dominated perspectives. I'm not going to play Rebel Girl. You can listen to it on your own. Sleater-Kinney was another Riot Girl band from the Seattle area. Formed in 1994, the group initially had only 2 members, guitarist Corin Tucker and Carrie Brownstein. They added drummer Janet Weiss in 1996, but the group never had a bass player. Instead, Tucker tuned her guitar to a lower range than Brownstein's and allowed her to flesh out the harmonies without the use of a bass. Like Bikini Kill, Sleater-Kinney sang about rage, lust, and depression from a female perspective. I Want to Be Your Joey Ramone from 1996, Call the Doctor, reflects the group's punk influences and female perspective. I'm also not going to play I Want to Be Your Joey Ramone. You're welcome to listen to it on your own. Another important strain of alternative rock to emerge in the 1980s was the jam band. Inspired by 1960s groups such as the Grateful Dead, jam bands combined many different musical styles and genres and focused on lengthy and improvisational forms. The band Fish blended dozens of musical genres in their music, including but not limited to blues, country rock, folk rock, bluegrass, funk, and classical music. In a way, the eclecticism and free forms of Fish's music reflect a sense of optimism and inclusion that's absent in the music of other alternative rock groups of the time. Formed in 1985 by Vermont College students Trey Anastasio, Paige McConnell, Mike Gordon, and John Fishman. The group also worked closely with a luthier, that's somebody who builds guitars and other stringed instruments, named Paul, and I'm not even going to attempt his name. He designed and built instruments specifically for the members of Fish, but he also works as their sound engineer. Fish has been enormously successful as a live act, but they have never released an album that has sold 1 million copies. Their live shows consistently sell out, and they encourage audience members to record during their live shows and trade those bootleg recordings with other fans. The recording Stash from the 1995 concert album Fish, a live one, this demonstrates the group's approach. The music is a collective improvisation in which each member of the band explores different sounds, rhythms, and styles on his own instrument. At times, individual musicians stand out, and at others, the group plays together, reacting to each other's lines as they are played and developed. At just over 12 minutes long, Stash is a relatively short recording compared to the rest of Fish's repertoire. Fans and critics agree that the music of Fish is best enjoyed live, and studio or even live recordings do little justice to the sounds and effects created when the band jams on stage for a live audience. Being that Stash is over 12 minutes long, we will not be hearing it tonight. During the 1990s, other bands such as Blues Traveler, which is one of my favorites, and the Dave Matthews Band, also worth hearing, took the jam band aesthetic and combined it with popular song forms. New York-based Blues Traveler was heavily influenced by Southern rock bands such as the Allman Brothers, and their music often features improvised harmonica solos by singer, guitarist, and songwriter John Popper. The group first achieved commercial success with their 1994 single Runaround, which is a great tune. The Dave Matthews Band includes an unusual collection of instruments, such as acoustic guitar, bass, saxophone, and violin, and their style melds jazz, bluegrass, and funk. Their catchy style of improvisation led them to commercial success with 1994's Under the Table and Dreaming. The Dave Matthews Band toured with Fish in 1994, and John Popper of Blues Traveler has performed guest harmonica solos in songs such as What Would You Say? Oh, gee. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Which one should we hear? I think we will hear What Would You Say? Sorry, you've been overruled, husband. We're going to do Dave Matthews. But do go back and listen to Runaround. I bet you've heard it before because it gets more radio play than Dave Matthews these days, but it's definitely worth hearing and one of my favorites. There's that harmonica solo. What would you say? Monkey Jones is all the story. Stay on the floor and see how all the my time's passing me by. Why would you say don't drop one? Don't cut my lifeline. I I'll just stay every day. That's way people got to. Mom, it's my birthday. What you say? There's John Popper again on harmonica. My friend cannot speak all lifetimes can sleep down. What would you say? A lot of energy in that. Sorry. So, in conclusion, in general, alternative rock musicians rejected the values and ideas of mainstream listeners and record labels. At the same time, many groups such as REM, Nirvana, and Pearl Jam eventually signed with major records and sold thousands or even millions of records. Other groups such as Phish have never cracked the album charts, but their live shows are always sold out. The troubled relationship between the values of alternative rock musicians and the success of alternative rock musicians led to a number of conflicts and tragedies during the 1990s, most notably Kurt Cobain's suicide. As alternative rock musicians achieve mainstream success, they grapple with issues of authenticity and fears of selling out. This quiz will be open after class. You should also do chapters 38 and 39 to put us in a position to be where we need to be to hit right for the final, which will be the week of December 12th. So tonight we did 36 and 37, do 38 and 39 on your own, please. And as always, and I don't know, since we used a video tonight, I don't know if it's gonna block it. So if it blocks it, I will try to check in the morning and I will move it over to Google Classroom. Again, if you're having trouble using Google Classroom or you're not quite sure what to do about that, please let me know and I will walk you through it. It's pretty easy to figure out. But that's my fallback position if YouTube blocks it, which is silly because the video came from YouTube, but I just work here. So any questions? Okay, well, my cat and dog seem to enjoy the music tonight, so I hope you did too. And as always, if you have questions between now and next week, just send me an email and I will try to get back to you. Okay, that's a wrap for tonight. Thanks.